Well, good morning. Good to have you guys here. As Pastor George said, I'm not Joel Eason, and he and his wife actually are on their way back from a week in New York together. So be praying for them that they arrive safely so he can come back and preach to us again next week. I do want to say one thing about the ladies' event. Ladies, please make every effort to come to that. If you pay today, it's $75. After that, it jumps up to $95, but it only takes $25 to hold your spot. And think about it. We have a church of 1,000. There's 80 spots open. So, and please don't let money be an issue. We have options out there. So go see Jen, because it's important to refuel your tank so that you can be a better mom and wife and employee and all that. And you'll never get to Safety Harbor for that price anyway. So go ahead and do that. So we're in this series called My Family and Our Bumpy Road. And today the topic is control. And we are having some technical difficulties, so all of the slides are not going to be up there. So bear with us as I do a lot of reading from the Bible to you. I myself am not an auditory learner. I'm more visual, so I'm going to be reading a lot to you, and I would love to have you with me. If you didn't grab sermon notes on your way in, and you would like some, it might be a little more important today because we don't have it behind me on the screens. If you just raise your hands, the ushers will bring them to you, like we aim to serve here. And you can get your sermon notes because it'll be a little better to have it in front of you. So the week that I got was control, ironically enough, because I have no control over the fact that the monitors aren't working. But as far as family goes, one thing that you can count on with family is that it is always changing. And most of those changes are completely out of your control. You cannot control that your kids are going to get older. You can't control if you or a spouse gets sick. You can't control if somebody is let go from a job. There's just so many different things that happen in life that are just way out of our control. And even little things add up to make for a really bad day. Just sometimes things spill. I mean, just all these little things add up, and you're like, Rah! And so you're just completely out of control. I'm going to go through these photos that I was going to show you. So as I was thinking of a good character study in the Bible to talk to you guys about control, oddly enough, the story of Abraham came to my attention, and I was thinking, that's kind of weird. I was praying about it, and I thought, Abraham. Well, once I read through the story of Abraham, it's all about this huge tug of war that this family had with God over the issue of control. And sometimes they got it right, and sometimes they didn't. And Abraham and his family, these people put the fun in dysfunctional. There are some highly dysfunctional incidences happening in this story, and I want to go through it with you. The first statement that you can put in your notes kind of sets the tone for what we're going to talk about today, and that is that when you make the decision to take control away from God, whether it be intentionally or without you even realizing it, there is always a reason and there's always a result. Everybody's heard of cause and effect. It's the same idea. There's always a reason you took control back, and there's always a result to you taking control back away from God. Now, if we can glean lessons from this story so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, that's the idea. That's the whole point of the Bible. So we're going to go through the story of Abraham and look at the reasons and the results so that we do not repeat their mistakes. Now, the first part of Genesis chapter 12, which is where our story begins, God is telling, at the time his name was Abram, he's telling Abram, get your stuff together and go, and it says in the Bible, to a place I will tell you. He didn't say go to Egypt. He didn't say where they were going. He basically said, pack your stuff up and go, and I'll tell you when to stop. And he did it. He got that one right. He did it. And the Lord, there came a promise and there came a blessing with this order that God gave to Abram. And what he said was, if you do what I say, I will make you the father of many nations. Now, at the time, that promise is a really big deal because not only are Abram and Sarai barren, they are also in their 70s. So I'm guessing that they have assumed that ship has sailed. And so God says, I will make you the father of many nations. Now in Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to 13, this is what it says. Just picture it back there. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. So say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. He lied and said that his wife was his sister. And it looked at first like he was going to get away with it. Pharaoh was like, okay, hot sister. So Pharaoh took the sister in and was giving gifts to Abram. He gave him cattle and servants and camels, and I'm guessing back then those were good gifts. Today, if we got a camel, we'd be thinking the person hated us. But back then, fantastic gifts. But then what ended up happening was Pharaoh's whole house got sick, got really sick. And so it says in verse 17, the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai. So what happened was Pharaoh found out the truth. This is really his wife, not his sister. And he's like, I've had it with the both of you. Get out of here. So Abram, this is the first line of your things there. Abram took control out of fear. He was scared that he was going to be killed, so he took the reins back and lied about his circumstances. So how many times have we done that? How many times have we said, I'm not sure God's going to come through, so I'm going to take the reins on this one? You're a little scared he's not going to do what you think he should do, so you're going to take matters into your own hands. So he left Egypt, and he had his nephew Lot with him also. But because they were traveling together, all their herds and all their people and all their tents, they were clashing into each other. There wasn't enough grass for all those new camels. You know, everybody was bumping into each other. They started fighting. So what Abram did was he said to Lot, look, we need to divide the land in half, and I'll give you first dibs. So Lot looked around, and this is what it says in Genesis 13, verse 10. Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Now this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east, and the two men parted company. So the second line is, Lot took control out of selfishness. He took the better land for himself. But here's the thing. Sometimes we think we know what's best, that we're smart enough to see the big picture, but we're not. I can kind of hear God going, oh, honey, sweetie, baby. This is not going to end well for you. On the surface, Lot chose the land that would be the most beneficial. It was more lush. It was just better land. But it happened to border Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is going to come into play later. So have you ever thought like Lot? I don't know that God has my best interest at heart, and I deserve this, even if it means somebody else has less. There are shady business deals that happen all the time because of this thinking. Not asking God what he wants, but just taking the best for ourselves. Now, for time's sake, we're going to skip over chapter 14, but the gist of it is that Lot gets himself captured in the middle of a war, and Abram has to go in and rescue him. Then in chapter 15, God is saying to Abram again, I'm going to make you the father of many. God's promise never changes through this whole story. His promise never changes. But here's what Abram says in Genesis 15, verses 2 to 3. Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Now you can kind of see him wringing his hands with this. And notice that the assumption is that God is saying no instead of not yet. He says, you've given me no children, so a servant's going to get everything I have. He's assuming God is saying no instead of not yet. And a lot of times we take God's silence as a no, when really it is a not yet. So, Abram, in your next line, took control out of worry. When we start to doubt that God is capable and willing to do what we want, it's a very easy transition to taking control back for ourselves. Because you go from, I'm afraid God isn't going to do what I think he should, to, I'm not sure I'm hearing him right, to, I'm not sure he's hearing me, to, I'm not sure he cares, and then you go to, I'm not sure he's even there, and then you have control back. It's real easy to do, and you don't even realize you've done it. Now, this is exactly what happened with Abram and Sarai. They take control back. So listen, in Genesis 16, 1-2, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, in case you missed that. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar, so she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children, so go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Well, of course he did. So, Sarai we're going to move along. Sarai took control out of impatience. That's your next line. She tried to make God's promise happen faster. She's instituting a poorly thought out plan B, really poorly thought out, instead of waiting on God's timing. We are always in such a rush. If God's not answering our prayers right now, we're going to take it into our own hands. And there are so many people in the Bible who waited years, even decades, to see the promises that God made come true. What happened in this particular story is that Hagar did get pregnant, and it turns out the sight of her made Sarai sick. So she aims her rage, instead of taking responsibility, well, this was my doing, she aims her rage towards Hagar and Abram. Now, I'm really not trying to throw my fellow ladies under the bus, but this sounds like us, right? So this is what she says, Genesis 16:5. Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. Okay, I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she's pregnant, and she despises me, is what she says. So this is one of those result things. Remember, we were talking about reasons and results. This is a result, and this is the next line. Sarai took control, which resulted in animosity. In fact, she sent Hagar away. Sent her completely away. So we do this. You might not realize you do this, but you do this. This person or situation reminds me of a bad choice or a regret that I made. So instead of taking responsibility, I'm going to just get rid of them. Like, just not be friends with them anymore, not see them anymore. I'm going to put some generic, vague Facebook status up talking about purging myself of all the people who don't make me feel awesome 100% of the time. And I'm going to get a bunch of likes and think that I did the right thing. When really, because you don't feel awesome, is because God is trying to speak to you through your conscience and tell you that you didn't make a good choice. Whew. So, we're going to go through to chapter 17, where God is again, for the jillionth time, restating his promise to Abram. And only this time, to really show he means it, he's going to institute the act of circumcision. And we're going to just coast right by that, because I do not in any way feel qualified to talk to you about that. But I will say this. In chapter 17, he also changes Abram and Sarai's name to Abraham and Sarah. It came with the covenant. It came with the promise. The names mean different things, and his name means father to many nations. And so from here on out, you're going to hear Abraham and Sarah instead of Abram and Sarai. And I didn't want you to think that I was drinking something weird in the green room and I'm off of it. Their names changed. Okay, moving on to chapter 18. Genesis 18 verses 11 and 12 says, again, in case you've missed this, Abraham and Sarah were very old. And Sarah was past the age of childbearing, so Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Sarah, this is the next one, took control out of hardness. Hardness. She became bitter and sarcastic while waiting for God's promise to manifest. Hardness or bitterness can creep in without you even realizing it happened. She's going, we are both old and busted. If God thinks that I, in my old age, can carry around a baby, he has lost his marbles. I'm not even sure we heard him right. We ate some bad pizza the other day. Maybe that was just that and not a real promise and blah, blah, blah. And when you start to allow the hardness and the bitterness to take root, it's just a matter of time before you take control back for yourself. So, on to chapter 19, we are going to take our story back to Lot. Remember, Lot is the guy who took the best land, right? And it's bordering Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, God has decided there's all kinds of evil happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, and God is deciding he's had enough of those people. So he's going to destroy it, destroy the whole place. But based on a promise that he made to Abraham and Sarah back in chapter 18, he sends 2 angels in to pull Lot and his family out before he destroys it. And he only gives them one order, and it is, you're listening, don't look back. But Lot's wife could not contain herself. She had to get one look in. Don't look back at what? And here's one of the weirdest verses in the whole Bible. Genesis 19:26. Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. As you do. I've always thought this was a corny verse. You know, when you're a kid and you're in Sunday school and they have the flannel board, and I can still see it. The lady looks and the teacher puts it down and then puts up salt. And you're like, wow. But when you're an adult, you're like, wait, what? But here's what I think. The more I thought about this, and it even occurred to me driving in this morning, sometimes you think one look won't matter. And it can have devastating effects. I'll just take one look. One look isn't going to matter too much. And one look becomes a longer look, and it becomes multiple looks. And maybe there's some action behind that look because you've turned, and then all of a sudden you've lost your whole family over one look. Sometimes when God says don't look, don't look. That just came to me today. Okay, back to, where am I? Okay, so as if the lady turning into salt isn't weird enough, this is now about to turn into a Spanish novella. Okay, Genesis 19:31 to 36. One day, I promise you this is in the Bible. One day, the older daughter said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. And I love that. She's like, all over the earth. Everybody else has kids but us. We do that all the time. We catastrophize. Did I say that right? Catastrophize, yeah. And so everybody has it but me. So I'm going to take matters into my own hands because God must mean for me to have what everybody else has, right? But here's what they did. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father. So that night they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you go in and sleep with him so that we can preserve our family line through our father. So they got their father to drink wine. That night also, the younger daughter went in and slept with him, and again he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. Raise your hand if you now feel better about your own family. Okay. Lot's daughters took control, which led to immorality. This is another result. They took control, which led to immorality. They didn't trust God to provide, and they took matters into their own hands. A lot of times we try to rationalize poor judgment to make ourselves feel better. And it's wrong is wrong. Doesn't matter the circumstances, wrong is wrong. So next we see Abraham and Sarah moving again. And they get to a new place. And again, Abraham says to Sarah, tell him you're my sister. We didn't learn that lesson the first time. We're going to go ahead and do that one again. That happens to us all the time. We didn't learn the first time. It's going to roll back around. So Abraham took control out of anxiety. That's the last one. Anxiety. And a lot of times we think, man, my child, my wife, my husband is really sick. And my prayers have seemed to be bouncing off the ceiling. I have no idea if he's going to come through or if he's even going to hear me. And we wring our hands and we can't sleep because we're up all night worrying, which is, by the way, a clear sign you have not given God control of the situation. And then I was studying this, and I was looking at all of these things, these blanks that we were to fill in. It occurred to me. I'm going to go through those words that you just wrote real quick. Make sure you have them right, okay? Fear, selfishness, worry, impatience, animosity, hardness, unrestraint, immorality, and anxiety. Got it? Okay, what are all of their opposites? The opposite of fear is faithfulness. Faith casts out all fear, right? The opposite of selfishness is kindness or generosity. The opposite of worry is peace. The opposite of impatience is quite obviously patience. The opposite of animosity is love. The opposite of hardness is gentleness. The opposite of unrestraint is self-control. The opposite of immorality is goodness. And the opposite of anxiety is joy. Now, all those opposites are somewhere else in the Bible. Galatians 5:22-23 says, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. When you insist on hanging on to control, you are robbing yourself of your fruit. When you insist on hanging on to control, you are robbing yourself of your fruit. If my husband and I are in a car and he is driving and I decide I'm going to take control over this car and I start going like this and getting the steering wheel and hitting the gas and brakes and he's freaking out and I'm freaking out, are either of us displaying any fruits of the Spirit? No, we are freaking out. Both of us have anxiety and worry and animosity and unrestraint and all those awful things. The bottom line is, this is the last thing in your notes, when you insist on being in control, things eventually end up being out of control. You can't control your circumstances. People get sick, people lose jobs, kids get bad grades, confrontations happen. You cannot control outside influences, and in fact, it can all change with one instant. One phone call, one car accident, everything's changed, and none of it was under your control. What you can control is your decision to love, to stay, not to quit. You can control your response. Sometimes we let God drive the car of our bumpy road, but we have that little driver's ed brake. You know, the driver's ed teacher who has the brake? And we reserve the right to use it because God's not moving fast enough or he's moving too fast or whatever. But the fact of the matter is God can't do his perfect work and take it and run with it because you're still holding on to it. The bottom line is the road is bumpy and you can't pave it. His plan is better. It's not easier, it's not simple, it's not trouble-free. The road isn't necessarily paved, but it's good. It's eternally and perfectly good, even when we disagree with it. Now, we're human, and giving control over to God isn't necessarily a one-time thing. Sometimes you give it up, and then you realize you've taken it back, and you have to give it up again. And then you realize you've taken it back several months later, and then you have to give it up again. The awesome thing is, every time, God's perfect will can still happen. His promise, despite all that mess that those people did, God's promise was fulfilled. The things they did could have messed it up tons of times, and there were natural consequences, but God's perfect will and his promise was still fulfilled. That's awesome. That means we can't mess up enough to keep God from doing what he wants to do if we keep surrendering control. But I'm scared to turn control over to God. Sometimes he lets people die, and sometimes he allows violence, and sometimes Christian parents end up with kids strung out on drugs, and sometimes people are unemployed for months and months and months. Okay, I heard this. There's a Middle Eastern folk story about a man who had a horse, and his horse ran away. And his neighbor comes up and says, your horse ran away, that's bad luck. The guy said, what do I know? The next day, the horse comes back with 20 other horses. The neighbor comes back and goes, you have good luck. The horse came back with 20 horses, good luck. And the guy said, what do I know about these things? So the guy's son was trying to tame the new horses, and one of them kicks him in the leg and breaks his leg. And the neighbor comes back and goes, bad luck. Your son was taming those horses and he got his leg broken. And the guy said, what do I know about luck? And then a little bit time later, some thugs came trying to recruit people for their gang. And they were taking all the able-bodied boys. They saw the kid with the busted leg and they said, we can't use him, and they moved along. And the neighbor said, what great luck. Your son had a broken leg, and they wouldn't take him. Here's the point to that. When it comes to the bumpy road, we don't know what lies ahead. And sometimes it might look like good luck or bad luck or whatever, but from your vantage point, you can't see all the way down the road, but he can. And if you just leave him in control, it'll be so much easier for you. We're just going to mess things up. One of my favorite quotes, and I've said it from this stage before, is from Max Lucado. And it says, life is like a jigsaw puzzle, but we've only been given a piece. But God has the cover of the box. He sees the whole picture. You might think that the most direct, shortest route from point A to point B is the best way. But God might know that you need to take the scenic route. It might take longer, it might be bumpier, but there are things along that road that you need to see and experience, and maybe even a rest stop where you just feel like you're waiting forever. But he's going to teach you some things. Sometimes the quickest fix isn't necessarily the best one. But that's what faith is all about. Trusting him to be in control no matter what the outcome. Are there things in your life that you need to relinquish control back over to God? Is there something that you keep grabbing back or hanging on to and you need to once again surrender the wheel? I feel like I would be remiss if I just said a prayer and we all walked out of here without having the chance to have a minute to wrestle with God a little bit. Some of us might have a really hard time letting go. But I'm pleading with you that it's to your best interest to let God have complete control over every area of your life. So I'm going to say a prayer, and then you're just going to hear the piano music for a minute or so as you pray. and then you'll be on your way. You can hit up Cracker Barrel or whatever you do after this. Father, thank you so much for these lessons that you've given us, so we don't have to experience these things for ourselves, because we can look to your word and see what the outcomes would be. Help us to exchange the hardness, the bitterness, the anxiety, all of those things in exchange for the fruit of your Spirit. Father, we want the love and the joy and the peace and the patience and the kindness and the goodness and the faithfulness and the self-control. So we hand you all of our junk, and we ask you to have your way in our lives today.